Just briefly before we get started, on behalf of the center, this is Venerable's first teaching for Tupten Norbu Ling. So, on behalf of the center, I just wanted to welcome him virtually. I had the good fortune of also being able to invite Venerable back in 2018 to a different center and receive teachings from him there. So I was delighted to be able to do that again. We almost had the extreme good fortune of hosting Venerable in person, so we'll have to hold the aspiration that will work out in the future. But still, we're really grateful that you were able to accept our invitation. Venerable Legtsok took ordination in 2001 with His Holiness. He's been a teacher for 15 years, and he's in the 19th year of his Geshe studies. So quite close now to the Geshe degree. So hopefully we'll have Geshe Legtsok coming to the center in the future. So thank you so much for
And
accepting our invitation. It's great to see you again.
thank you, Dunab. Yeah, thank you, Dunab, for inviting me and the introduction. And hello to you all. Welcome. I'm glad to see you here for this Discovering Buddhism module. So let's see. Yeah, I see you're kind of spread out, no? I mean, you're not all physically in New Mexico, it looks like.
We
But
are almost all online and at least across 5 states, if not more.
oh, really? Oh, okay. Nice. Okay. Yeah, I didn't, I only just realized now that we're on the program is, this session is scheduled on Mountain Daylight Time. I had Mountain Standard Time logged in my phone, and I just double checked it, and I realized because in India, we don't have this daylight savings time, so it's just always the same time. It doesn't change. I'm not used to the clock changing back and forth. But yeah, I did prepare some outlines. So this session, this module on Samsara and Nirvana, it's the 9th module in this Discovering Buddhism course. So Venerable Dunda told me different teachers have been teaching each module. So yeah, I hope that's gone well so far. Let's see. So let me think. Well, usually I like to begin a session with a little bit of spend some time focusing on our motivation, generating a positive motivation for the session. Especially a bodhicitta motivation, if we can. And then maybe we'll just recite the Shakyamuni Buddha's name mantra. It's a way of going for refuge. And then I'll explain more about what my plan is for the next 6 sessions. So I'll be with you for 6 sessions, 6 teaching sessions for this module. And then I believe there'll be some meditation kind of sessions afterwards. Okay, so why don't you get comfortable wherever you are in a kind of meditation posture, and we'll just sit quietly for a few minutes, checking our mind. For me, it's morning here, but for you all, you probably had a full day wherever you are. So kind of, let all the activities, the business and thoughts of the day kind of drift into the background and focus on the present moment. So as you get comfortable in your meditation posture, then bring your mind to the present moment and focus on an object of placement meditation, either your breath or your mind or a visualized image or whatever you like, and then just practice trying to focus your attention doing placement meditation and letting go of distraction for a minute or so. Mm. And then as a support for generating a positive motivation, it's helpful to visualize oneself surrounded by all sentient beings. So usually the way, like in the context of meditating on the four immeasurable thoughts, or mm, yeah, meditating on bodhicitta, then we usually visualize ourselves surrounded by beginning with our friends and family. So we can divide all sentient beings into three groups: friends, antagonists, and strangers. So usually begin with the first. So we can visualize oneself surrounded by friends and family to either one's right and left and behind one, because they support one. So we can begin with your mother of this life. Imagine seated at your immediate left. Then all your female friends and family, aunts and grandmothers, and female cousins, siblings, children, friends to your left and behind you. Just briefly imagine they're there, present with you. And then to your right, your father of this life and all your male family friends. To your right and behind you. And then seated directly in front of you, facing towards you, a few meters distant or more. Then those whom you're most prone to become irritated, angry with. So we visualize them seated in front because they remind us to practice patience towards them. Mm. You know, there's something I never thought of before, but it just came to mind now. If there might be in this group of antagonists or enemies, for some of us, there could be someone who's deeply harmed us in the past, such that not only there's danger we give rise to anger at them, but that they instill fear in us, that we feel afraid just to think of them or to be in their presence. So if there's someone like that, then in your experience, then because when we're sitting meditating, we want to feel completely safe. So if there's someone that even if you bring to mind, you feel unsafe, then can visualize them in a far, far distant, at a great distance, in a far distant place, in which they can, and there's no possibility they could cause you any harm, but you're still aware of their existence. Mm. But otherwise, typically we visualize those who are prone to become irritated, angry with, seated directly in front, facing towards us. And then all the other sentient beings who we don't have a special affinity or affinity for or aversion towards. So, and human beings, animals, and others. Imagine filling all of space around you. So imagine them all in human form, and you can imagine they're kind of sitting, participating in the session with you. Mhm. So then turn your attention towards just your own personal motivation for this session. So whatever motivation you generate, it should be authentic, not just mouthing some words or something, or just kind of blindly following anything I suggest. Um, but it's helpful to think in terms of the three scopes of motivation. That um, our motivation shouldn't be just limited to ourselves alone for happiness of this life, and that would be just a worldly motivation. It will only give rise to a result of something limited to this life. So because this is a Dharma activity, then we want to transcend just our own selfish concern. Think of benefiting not only ourselves, but also benefiting others. And then also transcend concerns of just this life. So of course we want, to improve this life, but we also want to do something more substantial that will be beneficial in the long-term future, even beyond the transition of death, dying away from this life. So try to think in your own way to, whatever we do in this session on learning about samsara and nirvana. And may it be something beneficial, not only myself, but for other sentient beings, my family, friends, strangers, even enemies, countless other sentient beings. And then may it be beneficial not only in this life, but in countless future lives. And ultimately lead me to liberation from all forms of suffering in whatever way is possible. And also help me quickly achieve the peerless state of full enlightenment. So that's the kind of traditional Buddhist way of generating a motivation. But within that, spend a minute or two in generating a personal, whatever personally is most meaningful for yourself. Mm. Okay, so with that motivation, then if you like, you can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha in the space before you and generate the mind of refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and then your own spiritual teachers. And then we can recite the Shakyamuni Buddha's name mantra. It's a way of going for refuge and invoking his blessings. Taya ta o moni moni maha monai so ta taya ta o moni maha monai so taya ta o moni moni maha so. So you can visualize briefly from Shakyamuni Buddha's holy body, then first white light rays, countless white light rays radiate out, purifying one's own body, speech, and mind. Light entering through one's crown, filling one's entire body. And the same with all the other sentient beings visualized around you. And they become completely purified of afflictive emotions or delusions and contaminated karma and the imprints of these, and all purified also of all sickness and suffering. And then golden light rays radiate out from every pore of Shakyamuni Buddha's body. On the tip of each, an emanation of Shakyamuni Buddha. So one emanation comes to the crown of your head, and same with all the other sentient beings seated around. And then from that blissful golden nectar light flows down, filling your entire body with great kind of sense of well-being, health, bliss, and all the realizations of the path to enlightenment. And you and all sentient beings become one essence with Shakyamuni Buddha. Then if you like, you can visualize the Shakyamuni Buddha, and the space in front of you comes to the space above the crown of your head and abides there during the session. So then we'll stop there for the preliminary kind of meditation. I was thinking, yeah, well, the name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha, Hayata Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Soha, it means, well, Tayata means the one thus gone. So it means one who's gone completely beyond suffering, gone beyond samsara, and also gone beyond sort of all the imperfection and obstacles to enlightenment. So one has gone to the farthest shore of developing themselves as a person, developing positive qualities. So Tayata, that's a common epithet for any Buddha. And then, but the main part of the mantra, Muni Muni Mahamuni Soha. Muni means like, can mean like a sage or a rishi, but it also has a connotation of to subdue, like to pacify or train. It's kind of like if you want to tame a wild horse or a wild animal, or here it's more like tame your own mind. So we have, because the reason we're, in relation to samsara and nirvana, the reason we're in samsara is because our minds are unsubdued. And how can we see our minds are unsubdued is because even situations when we don't want, then we give rise to anger or fear or jealousy or greed. Those those emotions which disturb our mind, they arise kind of uncontrollably. Of course, we have some degree of control, but it's not that we can totally be without any kind of disturbing state of mind that we don't want to have. Again and again, disturbing states of mind arise in our continuum, in our mental continuum, in a way that we don't want. And then another way we don't have control is at the time of death. Then we don't know where we're going to take rebirth. We don't know how we're going to die. So we have sickness arise uncontrollably, or other disturbing life events, disappointments, and so forth arise uncontrollably. But especially even especially at the time of death, then we don't know where or how we're going to take rebirth. We don't have control over that process. So so Muni Muni Mahamuni Asoa. So it means basically control. Maha means great control. So be it. So it's a sort of epithet of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha's name mantra, saying that you're one who has completely gained autonomy, gained control over your own mind. So it's a way of praising. Buddha is saying that he's gained control, and thereby he's found a state of peace that's beyond suffering and the cause of suffering, nirvana, and also abandoned all obscurations which would obscure the mind from knowing anything. So in that way, it kind of relates to what we're going to look at during this module on samsara and nirvana. So okay, so we have 6 sessions together. Why don't I need to be able to share my screen? Can, right? Great. Okay.
You have.
Thank you. So yeah. Well, maybe before I do that, let's say a little bit more. There we go. So within the reading materials, as for previous modules that you've looked at, then there are this kind of a packet put together by FPMT of different articles by Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and other teachers in that PDF packet of reading materials for this module. And then there's also usually some pages from the Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun, which is a set of teachings that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche initially gave when they were in the very early days of FPMT, and they gave to students in the West. But then there's also this Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand by Pabonka Rinpoche. So usually, yeah, because the Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand has the classical outlines for each of the topics, well, most of the topics in Discovering Buddhism. So usually I use the outlines from that as a basis for putting together, for dividing up the sessions by topic, and then presenting each of the topics within, that we need to cover during this module. So I was looking at the FPMT, at the description for this module in like the, I don't know, student materials packet. You would have it. Well, I'm not sure the students have it actually. There's an outline of like, how many sessions to do and what are the required readings and things for the staff and teachers. But it has a list of all the topics that need to be covered. So in your student packet, I'm not sure that's there or not. But the way they list the topics is completely, I don't know, the order is all kind of mixed up. So basically what we need to cover in this module is, in the Lam Rim, is the middle scope within the Lam Rim, all the topics of the middle scope. So basically that begins with the Four Noble Truths, and then extensive presentation of the truth of suffering. So I guess you all have probably encountered the Four Noble Truths so far in the course, right? There's the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path, right? So in the Lam Rim, I mean, oddly, there's no real heading like the Four Noble Truths in the Lam Rim, but they're mainly covered in the middle scope, right? So remember in the Lam Rim, because I think you've done the module on the path, right? I forget what the name of the module is, but it's on the entire path. So so remember in the entire path of the Lam Rim, there's three sections. Okay, there's three sections. So there's the path for beings of small capacity, it's called, or it's labeled different ways, but the small scope is another label. So that's primarily topics. Well, I'll show you in the slide below, but it's primarily topics for those practitioners whose main aspiration is to achieve happiness in future lives for themselves alone. And then there's the middle scope, or the path of beings of middle capacity. So that's topics to meditate on, contemplate and meditate on, for beings whose main aspiration is not merely to achieve happiness in samsara in future lives, but seeing the suffering of all of samsara and wishing and then wishing to be free from that whole process of being born, aging, and then dying, taking rebirth again through the force of afflictive emotions and karma. So for a person who has a sense of that whole process of samsara and then wants to be free from that, then there's this whole set of meditation topics. Actually, it's the middle scope was more like topics to bring you to that aspiration, renunciation, to develop develop in you the wish to be free from samsara by understanding, what samsara is. So that's what we'll focus on in this module. And then, of course, then there's the great scope of the Lam Rim, which is the stuff that you probably signed up for the Discovering Buddhism, is learn more about compassion and bodhicitta and wisdom of dependent arising and emptiness. So that comes out, that comes in the Discovering Buddhism. It comes towards the end in the way it's typically presented. Yeah. Although His Holiness Dalai Lama often says, for people who have a kind of modern education, especially some familiarity with science and logic and reasoning, it makes more sense to present the emptiness, the dependent arising and emptiness at the outset of one's kind of introduction to Buddhism. and then show how the Four Noble Truths follow from that, and how the Buddha Dharma Sangha are a valid refuge following from that. So one can kind of change the order a bit. But yeah, so without digressing. So yeah, so that mainly I was saying that the topics, way I'm laying out the topics though, within your readings, it's good, when you do the readings, it's good to take the liberation in the palm of your hand as a basis. So the pages from liberation in the palm of your hand for this module is just the middle scope. It's all of the readings on the middle scope. So I've taken that as a basis for the outlines and for dividing up the sessions. So now we'll look at, so yeah, made 6 headings here, although they don't directly align to the way we'll do sessions. So they roughly do. So the first session today, I want to look at just in general, what is samsara, what is nirvana, and the Four Noble Truths, and how they relate to the presentation of everything else we're going to look at. And some basic things about the Four Noble Truths. And then next week, then we'll begin with the truth of suffering, and look at how that's presented in the middle scope. So there's different types of suffering of samsara. So talking about, basically how the nature of samsara is in the nature of suffering, and then different ways of looking at that by looking at different types of sufferings. So we'll look at that next week. And then the third session will be look at the Four Noble Truths. The second, the truth of the cause, or the truth of the origin, it's also called. So that we'll probably spend 2 sessions on, because that involves it's mainly afflictive emotions and karma. But within those, with delusions or afflictive emotions, so there's this term nyomong in Tibetan, it's translated in different ways because it's difficult to capture in English. But here it's translated as delusions. So some of the articles you'll see in your readings, they use delusions, but another term is, another way to translate the same Tibetan term is as afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions. Yeah, I think Jeffrey Hopkins, I think I saw him in a talk once. He said he has like 16 different ways to translate that term, and so different ones that work better depending on the context. Anyway, because that involves looking at, well, the 3 root delusions are ignorance, and then from that, attachment and anger, those 3. And then there's 3 others, pride, jealousy, and doubt. But because, one of the most useful things in Buddhist teachings is just understanding exactly what those afflictive emotions are, being able to identify them, and then learning to work with antidotes to reduce them. We'll spend more time on that, at least 2 sessions, looking at different afflictive emotions and antidotes and how to apply them. So how to reduce afflictive emotions. Then because there's a whole module on karma, I won't say much about karma, I'll just mention it. So that won't be a whole session. And then there's this beautiful illustration of, excuse me, of samsara called the Wheel of Life. So we'll spend at least 1 whole session on that, but I'll introduce it probably from at least next week, if not today. Yeah, probably from next week. And then we'll refer to it again and again through all the sessions, because it illustrates many of the things we're talking about. And then finally, we'll have 1 session on the renunciation and the path leading to liberation. So this covers the 3 higher trainings: the higher training in morality, higher training of concentration, and higher training of wisdom. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll say more about that later. So that'll be the 6th session. Okay. So that's kind of my plan for the course. So today, and I didn't bring my watch, so let me see. Stop sharing to see what time it is. Okay, so we've used about half an hour already. Any questions so far about anything I said? Have a drink if you have something nearby. Cheers. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough because I had a cold recently. I'm not quite. Still have a bit of phlegm in my lungs. Okay, then there's no questions yet. Yeah, if you do have any questions, you can just raise your hand if your screen's on, or raise your virtual hand if your screen's not. And if they're minor, I can just address them right away. Otherwise, we'll have more dedicated time towards the end. So we'll have a break after about another half hour. We'll take like a 5-minute break. And then we'll see where we're at. But I'll try to work in some, at least, 10, 15 minutes of meditation, and then at least 15 or 20 minutes of time just for discussion or comments or question and answer towards the end of the session. Okay, so back to the outlines. So I wanted to just review kind of where we are in the Lam Rim, and just to kind of help, because one thing, you should walk away from discovering the whole Discovering Buddhism course is kind of a clear idea of how the whole graduated stages of the path, how the Lam Rim is laid out. So I want to locate, this module within the Lam Rim, and to do that, just to kind of remind you of the main topics. So I was just talking about before the 3 main sections of the Lam Rim. So just to add one, there's 2 preliminary in the whole. So the main topics of the Lam Rim, right? There's 2 preliminary topics, which are Guru devotion and precious human rebirth, right? And then there's 4 topics of the path shared with beings of small capacity or of the small scope, which I was just mentioning. And then the topics shared with beings of the middle scope, and then the topics of the great scope, right? So the 2 preliminary topics are correctly relying upon a spiritual teacher, which is one whole module in Discovering Buddhism. It comes after this, I believe. And then the precious human rebirth, which you probably discussed about already. And then the topics shared, the topics of the path shared with beings of the small scope. So remember, beings of the small scope were defined by those whose aspiration was primarily to achieve happy or good rebirths in future lives. So this is called topics shared with the beings of the small scope, because it's with the assumption that you're studying or practicing the Lam Rim with the aspiration to achieve full enlightenment, right? So you're not a being of the small scope, but rather you're someone who is meditating on topics that are common with or shared with those who have that kind of more limited aspiration. So the 4 main topics of the small scope are impermanence and death, which I think you've covered already, and then the suffering of the lower realms, then refuge in the 3 jewels, and karma. So I don't know, have you covered all those already in previous modules? Yep, great, excellent. Okay, so then you're ready for the middle scope. So now topics of beings of the middle scope. So this is what we'll cover during this module: the 4 noble truths, with especially the first 2 in detail, the truth of suffering and truth of the path. Then the later 2 truths lesser so. But the 3 higher trainings fits in the truth of the path, right? In the middle scope, that's kind of the main path of practice. And then also the 12 links of dependent arising, which is part of the wheel of life, which I mentioned earlier. So the wheel of life has several sections, but the outermost rim has 12 links. Well, the depiction of 12 different forces, I guess you could say, by which we create karma, and then we cause that karma to ripen, and then we're thrown into rebirth, and then in that rebirth again we create karma. And so that's how the forces which propel this repetitive process of dying and taking rebirth in samsara, which is samsara. And then the topics of the great scope, which we'll come to later: bodhicitta, or great compassion, and bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve full enlightenment. And then based on that aspiration, the practices of bodhisattvas, subsumed in the 6 perfections. And then as a way to more directly benefit others, way of gathering and training disciples. So that'll come later. So that's the three scopes of the Lamrim, the main topics of each. So we're in the middle scope in this module. And yeah, so this session look at, so in this session, this first session, then we'll look at Samsara and Nirvana and the Four Noble Truths. So first, Samsara and Nirvana. So first, just looking at, well, what is samsara? The question comes. So, yeah, I've given a kind of definition here. Then I'll spend some time explaining it. So samsara, So samsara is the continuum of repeatedly taking rebirths in contaminated aggregates by the power of afflictive emotions or delusions and karma. And then there's this quotation from the Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, page 428 in the blue, the version with the blue cover. So he says the seventh Dalai Lama, Kelsang Gyatso's claim is the best, that samsara is one's continuum of rebirth in the contaminated, afflicted aggregates. So it's a little, not quite so clear. So to explain the parts of this kind of definition of samsara, so it's a continuum. So it being a continuum means, it's like it's like a stream, like the continuum of a stream. It's something that flows through time. So samsara is that. It's in a way, it's a process. It's something that it's a process that is continually unraveling through time. But it's not a process that's external to us. So, I mean, many times, we have the misnomer that samsara is like a place. I mean, it is like a place, but it's not literally a place. So it's not a place that we're in, like a building or a county or a state that we can get out of physically, but rather it's a state of being that we're in as a person. So if we look for, where is our samsara, it's no other place than our own body and mind, right? The continuum of our own body and mind in the way they exist now, that is samsara. There's nothing outside. Samsara is not, our samsara that we experience is not something outside of us. Now, of course, in other contexts and in general parlance, we can talk about samsara as being on, because each of us has our own personal samsara, right? So, and then as a community, we, as a community of beings who are living under the power of afflictive emotions and karma, then we're commonly in samsara. So we have a kind of shared samsaric experience. But when we talk about oneself being free from samsara, what we mean is freeing ourselves from this situation that we're in, state of being under the control of the habitual tendencies of a deluded mind, and then the karma that arises to those. So it's a continuum of repeatedly taking rebirths. So it's not like samsara is just one rebirth, and then when we die, then we naturally get free from that. If that was the case, then we wouldn't have to put all the the time and effort into studying, like discovering Buddhism and things. We would just wait till we die, and then samsara is over. But it's not that easy. So because it's a process that continues, it's not just one life, but it continues from life to life. And then, I mean, one might have the doubt, well, does it have a beginning? And will it ever end? Does it have an end? So as far as a beginning, no. We can come back to that later. I won't say much about it now, but one's own personal samsara. Well, you can think about the beginning of samsara in general in terms of, any sentient being's experience of samsara. Does that have a beginning? No, because there's no beginning to the continuity of consciousness. So this probably came up in one of the earlier modules on the mind, the continuity of the mind. That as an individual, does our continuum of consciousness have a beginning? for that to be the case, because any moment of awareness is only produced by a previous moment of awareness, because mind, this conscious experience, it doesn't arise. It's not something physical, so it can't be something produced by physical elements, molecules. And then there's no other force that would produce it. It can't arise from nothing, which is space. So it has to be produced by something. And the only thing that can produce a subsequent moment of consciousness is a previous moment of consciousness. So therefore, there can't be a beginning to the continuity of consciousness of any individual or consciousness in general. So by the same logic, well, I mean, the logic isn't exactly the same, but by similar logic, then you can't find a beginning to one's own personal samsara or samsara in general. But does our samsara have an end? Yes, if we eliminate the fundamental causes of that causes the fundamental causes that throw us into rebirth again and again. The most fundamental, which is ignorance, ignorance grasping at an inherently existent self. So, and then which gives rise to attachment and anger. So, because the minds of attachment, the mind of anger, they're based on a misperception, misunderstanding the way things exist. So, because any misunderstanding that we have is unstable, because it falsely engages with the world, it falsely engages with objects in a way that's not real. Then when we generate, wisdom, understanding reality as it is, it eliminates that misunderstanding, that ignorance. So because all of samsara, our whole process of suffering under the control of afflictive emotions and karma is all based on, it's like a house of cards. It's all based, its fundamental basis is completely unstable and mistaken. And because of that, although it has great endurance because it's continued from beginningless time until now, and if we don't do something about it, it won't end. So it's quite a intractable kind of unstable misperception, but still it's fundamentally erroneous in the way it perceives and engages with this object. So when we can understand this, the ignorance, which is the root of samsara and the root of attachment, the root of anger, jealousy, arrogant pride, and so forth, then that we can generate that wisdom to a degree that's more and more powerful, more and more strong, until eventually it completely eliminates the ignorance, which is the misunderstanding at the root of samsara. So thereby, it's possible to bring samsara to an end, right? So does samsara have an end? Yes, it does have an end, but it takes quite a lot of work to bring that about. We have to deliberately bring it about. It doesn't automatically just end on its own. So it's a continuum of repeatedly taking rebirths in contaminated aggregates. So what are these contaminated aggregates? It's our own body and mind. So why are they called contaminated? It's not because we've eaten poison or something, but rather because mainly because of their cause. Their fundamental cause is a disturbed state of mind. So then the nature of, for example, our body is to be ill at ease, right? To not be at ease. So that's why, however, when we sit in one position for, very long, eventually we feel uncomfortable. We stand or lie, whatever position we put our body in eventually gives rise to discomfort. So you can see also, if you try to meditate and focus your mind on something, it's so difficult to focus. The mind wants to, wander off, grasp at something else, remember something, plan something. So the mind is kind of like a wild monkey, jumping around all the time, without just being able to stay still and be completely content and at ease for a moment. So that's kind of a testament to the afflicted nature of the mind. So because the state of mind, and that, I mean, that's not the fundamental nature of our mind, as you can be debating with me, remembering that the nature of the mind is just that which is clear and knowing, as you've learned about in an early module. But it's the state of mind that we have now in this rebirth that we're in. So we've taken rebirth into this in this life, in all the lives we've had previously, as long as we don't eliminate the root of samsara, then all the lives would take six subsequently. We take rebirth into a contaminated body and mind. Means the body and mind are aggregates that are, so the aggregates refers to, there's 5 aggregates, right? The form aggregate, which essentially is our body. And then there's 4, they're called name aggregates, but it means essentially non-physical aggregates. So mainly it's different minds. So the minds of the next 2 in the list of 5, there's the form aggregate, our body, and then there's feeling. Feeling is a kind of experience, mental experience of, and there's physical feelings and mental feelings, but mental experience of pleasure, pain, or neutrality. And then there's discrimination, the identification of things like this is me, that's you, this is a table, this is a chair, this is good, this is bad. So there's discriminations. And then there's all other kind of mental factors. I won't go into that now. Different kinds, all other kinds of sort of minor minds, mental functions. And then the 5th aggregate is consciousness, which is primarily the mental consciousness. Anyway, so but the whole point in this definition though, of samsara is the continuum of repeatedly taking rebirths in contaminated aggregates. So it means contaminated kind of physical existence, physical rebirth, with basically kind of mind that's shaped by the karma of having taken rebirth as that kind of person. So now as a human being, then we all have, this kind of human mind, right? So which in which the kind of, well, the human experience, the kind of particular appearances and way of experiencing the world that is kind of human, human as opposed to animal or deva-like or a hell experience, is shaped by the karma, which has given rise to this rebirth. So the kind of mental experience that we have now is also propelled by karma that we accumulated and was ripened in previous lives. And then by the power of, and that's all by the power of afflictive emotions and karma. Okay. Anything about, well, why don't I'll go through these points and then ask see if you, at the end of the discussion of samsara, see if you have any questions. So these are just a few minor points. So samsara is not a place or a continent or a building that we are in, as I described earlier. Rather, it's our own continuum. So then, but the doubt might come well, there's also because as a person, we're a samsaric being, as long as we're stuck in because we talk about all this all the time, like I'm in samsara. So what's the difference between I, the person, and the samsara I'm in, right? There is a person. Basically, that's helpful to know. And then also the question comes, well, if I'm in samsara, then if samsara essentially is what I am, how can I be liberated from samsara? Wouldn't that mean that I go out of existence? That if I fundamentally a samsaric thing. So as a person, we're in samsara means we're in this condition that we're in, this state that we're in, whereby we have afflictive emotions and karma in our continuum, and those forces are at work, and we don't have power over those. We don't have a kind of autonomy to completely control our mind. So that's the difference between us and like a Buddha. That's why a Buddha is the one who has subdued, completely subdued, or greatly subdued. So be it. So a Buddha or an arhat is one who's completely subdued, gained control of the mind, gained control of and reduced their afflictive emotions, and reduced and undermined the ability of their karma function. So they are not thrown into rebirth and then experience sickness, aging, and death again and again. So as a samsaric being, it's like we're in this state, but it's not inevitable. We'll always be in this state. So as a person, we can eventually be free from this state of being, the samsara. So although samsara is not, again, it's not a place that we're in, but it's like a state of being that we're in. So as a person, we're in that state of being, and but that state of being it's like, it's part of our way of experiencing things in our physical experience, also our mental experience. Then the next point, it is also not an inevitable, a destined, or an intended state of being. So I wanted to make this point because, well, the question arises: is it inevitable that we'll always be in this state of suffering? As many, people might say. It's probably the common kind of worldview in sort of among many people in America or in the West, and many people in the world in general, that suffering is something that's inevitable, so we should just learn to deal with it, sort of have a stoic attitude, and not try to be free from it, because just struggling to be free from something that is inevitable or destined is just creating more suffering for oneself. But the reason samsara is not inevitable is because its fundamental basis is ignorance, is a misunderstanding. And so if we know truth as it is, then that leads to happiness, which transcends that ignorance and any state that is shaped by that ignorance. So that's why samsara is not inevitable, because it's based on a fundamental ignorance and misunderstanding. We can come back to that more later. And then it's not destined. So it's not like, we have to be in this state. It's not some kind of predetermined, predestined thing that, sometimes people have the idea that, well, certain suffering experiences are ones that we just we're meant to experience, we're meant to live through according to some kind of divine law or divine order, that we have to, we're destined to experience some painful, difficult experiences, and we just have to live through. So in Buddhism, there's no idea of kind of a divine creator or divine order that destines things to happen. So samsara is not something destined to happen. Rather, it's kind of like a big mistake. It's like a big misfortunate circumstance that we just fell into. If you ask why are we in samsara, then Buddhism doesn't really have an answer. It's just the state we're in. And then finally, it's not an intended state of being. So it's not that someone intended us to be in samsara. So again, in Buddhism, there's just no idea of a creator God that caused us to be in this state as a result of original sin or something. Then we're expelled from the Garden of Eden and we're cast into this kind of unpleasant circumstance. So there's no idea that some individual person or some force intended us to be in samsara. It's just a happenstance that we happen to be in this circumstance because we have ignorance and then attachment, aversion, anger, hatred, other afflictive emotions that arise from that, and that's the state we're in. And then so what did I say next? I don't remember. Okay. Rather, samsara is a state that we exist in primarily through the power of, erroneous forces in our minds. Its most fundamental basis or root is ignorance, and this ignorance is unstable. Yeah, so I've talked about that a bit already. Then we can eliminate this ignorance with wisdom that is stable and is immutable. So that's why, once we, to go on to Nirvana a little bit, and so to go on to Nirvana a bit. So that's why once we achieve freedom from samsara, which is Nirvana is a stable state because it's based on wisdom. It's based on an accurate understanding of how we exist, of how other phenomena exist. And so once you have an accurate, and especially an accurate understanding, and especially an understanding that is non-conceptual, that's not just something you arrive at through logical reasoning. I mean, that can also be irrefutable. But when you directly see it, in a non-conceptual way, it's your own direct experience of reality, then that's irrefutable, and it'll last. It doesn't. It can't be reversed or eliminated, or it doesn't decline, because it's our living, perception of reality. It's just like, like now you're looking at the screen in front of you. Well, it's more like this, maybe to give a better example. Like, think of something that is not in your house, that's not in the room that you're in. So if there's another room in your house, think of an object in that room that you recently saw, was in that place. I don't know. So for me, I'm in the office in our house now. I'm in the office, so I just left my bedroom. So in my bedroom, for example, I know there's a watch on my desk, which I wish I'd brought to the office. I forgot. So think of that object, but now, like, that object in the other room that you recently saw, it's not an object of your direct perception. You can't see it or hear it or touch it or taste it or smell it now, right? Unless it's something very fragrant in the other room. But if it's, object doesn't have the strong fragrance, it's not an object of your direct perception now. But yet you know almost irrefutably that it's in the other room, but by using logic, by using inference, because you recently saw it there. And if it had moved, and it probably doesn't have the ability to move on its own, and if someone had gone in and to the room and moved it, you would have probably heard that or known about it. So I'm not sure all those reasons apply in the example you're using, but in general, you can kind of use like that. So we can think that object in the other room, we can generate a valid inference that it's still there, right? It hasn't, since we've left the room, it hasn't disappeared from the room. So that understanding is quite stable, right? It's quite sure that we're correct. But that's not as stable as the fact that there's a screen in front of you that you're looking at, right? So there's a screen in front of you that you're looking at, and that there's no way anybody can convince you that that's not the case. It's possible someone could convince you that, oh, maybe that object you're thinking of in the other room is actually not there anymore, because who knows? Someone could have snuck in and taken it, or it could have, I don't know, something could have happened such that it's not there anymore. That is possible, unlikely, but possible. But something you directly perceive, like the screen in front of you, that is definite knowledge, totally unshakable. So this relates to samsara, because we can eliminate, so the ignorance, which is the root of samsara, it can be eliminated. First, when we first generate an antidote, it's a antidote. Well, we generate a wisdom which is which is a valid inference. We use logic and reasoning to arrive at that understanding, which is like, the understanding that that object in the other room is still there. But then by meditating on that wisdom again and again, becoming more and more familiar with it, purifying the mind, accumulating merit, then eventually we generate a direct perception of that truth of reality, emptiness, in short, or selflessness. And once we generate direct perception, it's our own direct experience, as clear as the screen or the table we see in front of us. And it's totally irrefutable. So, and that understanding, eventually we use it to eliminate the fundamental cause of samsara. So once we do that, then we achieve nirvana, and that nirvana is irreversible. So that nirvana is essentially the attainment of the elimination of samsara and all the causes that create samsara. So that's what we'll look at next. So, but before we do that, look at what nirvana is, and take a break. Any questions about samsara? Anything I've said so far?
Yes, if I
So I'll
may.
make.
Sorry.
Please.
I have a question about self-sabotage is a problem that I seem to have, and it seems to be something that I do over and over again, even consciously being aware that I'm doing it and not able to stop myself. And I feel that that's a karmic imprint. Generally, I'm looking for an exercise to be able to stop doing that because it is extremely frustrating. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a good question. Yeah, I have a bit of that too, actually. So in some circumstance, you know, I don't know, it seems to arise, for me, it seems to arise in particular in relation to some certain people and not other people. Like I notice, I wonder if it's the case for you too, but I notice some people that it's like, especially people who I know they already have a low opinion of me, then I'm more likely to do things that further reinforce that low opinion than
Oh,
than in relation to people who I know have a good opinion of me. It's almost
yeah.
like that another person having a low opinion of me kind of triggers this karma to
Yes.
self-sabotage.
Yes, I totally feel that.
Yeah. So, well, partly, I think it's definitely partly is karma for sure. So when we have karma for things to happen, yeah, I mean, the typical antidote is just to try to purify the karma, but it's not a very, precise and immediate kind of resolution. But partly it's, I think in that way that, it's when other people have a low self-opinion of us, and that, because, we each have a degree of confidence on the one hand and a degree of self-doubt on the other hand. So when other people are confident in us, it resonates with our own self-confidence and it reinforces that. Because generally, whatever state of mind we have, it resonates with the degree of that in other people's minds and vice versa. So whatever degree of state, if someone else has it, a degree of, especially opinions about us that another person has, it resonates with some degree of our own opinions about ourselves. So when someone else has confidence in us, it reinforces our own self-confidence. When another person has criticism of us and doubt about us, then it triggers our own self-doubt. So I think, so part of it's not so much karma, but psychology, right? The way other people's psyche affects our psyche. So I think one antidote to that is, well, if there's certain people in our lives that we see again and again, to try to reflect on how that works in relation to that person. And then when we're, before we go to meet, we're going to be in the presence of that person, kind of prepare ourselves for it, sort of build up a kind of armor, knowing that we tend to, a lot of times it's like an authority figure, someone in our family that's senior, like I don't know, aunt or uncle or a grandparent or parent or something, or someone else whose kind of judgment we feel like should matter or we feel like is more sound than our own sometimes. So, but one kind of way to work with that is before we go into the presence of that person, think about all the times we've self-sabotaged in the past and try to understand why we do that, and then try to reinforce our own self-confidence, our own assuredness in our own ability, our own way of seeing things clearly, of understanding things without having to rely and refer to another person's opinion, and just kind of try to stay. It's kind of like stay centered, sort of stay more centered in your own wholesome and good opinion of yourself. But then, oftentimes it happens. Self-sabotage happens in relation to someone, when we're not prepared for it, someone we haven't interacted with before, we just meet, or a circumstance we just happen to come into. Then it's a little more difficult because we don't have so much opportunity to prepare for it.
Well, that is very, very helpful. You hit the nail on the head for me anyway. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for your question. Any others?
I do have a question, which is centering around what seeming infinitude of samsara and karma. Both of them, it's like it feels soul crushing in terms of a lot of what's written about it. Yeah. And I don't know how to counter that. It's sort of like, yes, there's a part of me that goes, it's all too hard. I might as well give up now. And, I know there's a lot of counters to that, and I know this is not an uncommon reaction, but I'm just wondering what you would say would be the most helpful approach to this. And I'll volunteer. I also I've read Lama Yishi on Tantra, which then holds out some hope because one lifetime, I'm in it. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Actually, that I'm glad you mentioned that Lama Yeshe's Introduction to Tantra, because that does contain, and actually, it contains probably the best antidote to that kind of feeling of being overwhelmed by the immensity of karma and afflictive emotions, all the things, all the description of samsara, which we're going to go into much more next session. Next session is all about all the suffering of samsara. You're going to feel totally overwhelmed. The main antidote, because Lama Yeshe, it's one particular thing he could see about. One difficulty I think he saw in a lot of his students is low self-esteem, a lack of confidence, a low self-esteem. But that's related. Well, and his main antidote to that is to generate positive self-esteem, this positive, pure view of oneself, recognizing one's own pure nature and one's own potential for enlightenment, and focusing on that again and again and again, rather than focusing and giving our energy to all kind of the garbage that we're hindered by. And that's what that Introduction to Tantra is so much about. That's what the practice of Tantra is all about: identifying with our pure nature as opposed to identifying with our deluded kind of adventitious state of being that we're in. And that pure nature is always there. So that, well, but maybe just to step back a bit. So, because what I hear you're saying is, thinking about, anger, attachment, ignorance, how it has no beginning, how we're completely under the control of afflictive emotions, how we have this karma. I didn't even mention, we've been accumulating karma since beginning of lifetime. So we have, an immeasurable amount of karma to take rebirth in the hells as animals, as hungry ghosts, have everything miserable, everything terrible in the world that's possible to do, we've done. And therefore everything that's terrible that's possible to happen to an individual, we have the karma for that to happen to us. Luckily, we haven't met the conditions for that karma to ripen, but it's there. So so I remember when I was new to Buddhism feeling the same, similarly feeling completely overwhelmed by the immensity of this kind of description of all the negative aspects of the world, of myself as an individual, of our potential, like future experience. And it's true. Buddhism doesn't shy away from. Some modern Buddhist teachers do, but Buddhism as a whole teaching, it doesn't shy away from depicting like the terribleness of, the kind of the dark side of the world, if you will. But the way to counter that is to also look at the light side of the world, right? The potential for good. And in that way, also Buddhism is incomparable in its description of, what's possible for.
I think what I'm responding to is more that I have read various things, and they sort of go on ad infinitum on how long it takes, on what you have to do. You know where I'm going, okay? The literature is just so, and I don't know if that's part of a cultural consideration or what, but that's where I run into a problem, I think, as well.
Well, also, so, but one way is to, when you feel overwhelmed by the kind of the bad stuff, then look at the good side. But I can also commiserate that. Yeah, the whole. I mean, in short, the picture Buddhism paints is just massive and detailed. So it's too much to try to be able to process all at once. So I suggest when you feel overwhelmed by that whole big picture, just focus on the here and now and what you find most what practices you find most satisfying and most useful and what you need, like today in this moment, and don't worry about all the other stuff so much. And then when you feel kind of more relaxed and curious, then read more about. I mean, also don't have a sense that you have to. Well, you have to believe on the one hand everything you read. You're totally free just to think through it, topic by topic as you like. Or that you have to even remember everything. So in our own approach to Buddhism, it's important to not forget like why we became interested in it in the first place. Each of us has our own kind of personal story, why we generated any interest in Buddhism, why we decided to take Discovering Buddhism as a course. And of course, in the course, there's all kinds of things presented, and not all of it's going to be particularly relevant to us. So, we don't feel like you have to take it all on board or even fully engage with it, but keep coming back in your own, practice to what you find useful. So, think about like the way His Holiness Dalai Lama presents Buddhism, especially these days, as His Holiness, gets more and more elderly. Then he focuses more and more on just these essential couple points that he just hammers again and again every session. Is Holiness teaches dependent arising, dependent arising in emptiness and compassion for sentient beings, using your life to benefit others. Those are the things that, as Holiness always says, if there's nothing else you think about or do, just spend some time every day reflecting on interdependence, your interconnectedness with others, using your life to benefit others, how all sentient beings are the same and wanting to have happiness, wanting to be free from suffering. So when you feel kind of overwhelmed by this massive presentation of all this kind of, infinite past, infinite future, or infinite potential for enlightenment and all the infinite qualities of an enlightened being that we can become, and all the, infinite karma we've then focus is back on those essential things of, just being a good person, being the importance of being kindness, the importance of being kind-hearted, our interconnection with others, using our life to benefit others, or whatever, resonates most with you.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break now and then continue. Okay. So that's about samsara. So now I'll speak a little bit about nirvana and then the Four Noble Truths. So this is quite easy. Nirvana. Well, what is nirvana? Nirvana is a cessation, that is a complete abandonment of the afflictive obscurations. So essentially, within the causes, the two main causes of samsara are afflictive emotions, beginning with ignorance as most fundamental, and then attachment and anger, and then all the others arise from those. So, and then, well, within the two causes for samsara are afflictive emotions and karma. So within those, afflictive emotions are more fundamental, because even if we eliminate all of our contaminated karma, as long as we have afflictive emotions, immediately karma will be new karma will be produced again. So it's we acquire or accumulate contaminated karma because we have afflictive emotions. So afflictive emotions are more fundamental. So when we talk about the objects of abandonment, to be abandoned on the path, then there's two types: afflictive obscurations and knowledge obscurations. So afflictive obscurations are the objects of abandonment which prevent us from achieving just nirvana, just freedom from samsara, which does not entail omniscience, a state of fully developing our potential to know or fully developing other positive qualities. So that state of full enlightenment, which is the full development, the complete development of our ability to know phenomena, and also other positive qualities like generosity, enthusiasm, compassion. Obscurations to achieving full enlightenment are called knowledge obscurations, so they're more subtle. So to achieve just nirvana, mere nirvana, or the mere nirvana, which is just a freedom from samsara, then we have to abandon only the grosser or more coarse obscurations called afflictive obscurations. So, which are essentially um, the afflictive emotions and the imprints of those. Means like the seeds of those, the potency or the possibility for those afflictive emotions to arise again in the future. So essentially, nirvana is the abandonment of not only anger, complete abandonment of anger and attachment, jealousy, selfishness, pride, the arrogant pride. Remember, pride, there's a wholesome pride and an afflictive pride. So we're talking about the afflictive pride or arrogance. And then the abandonment of the root of those, ignorance, grasping at true existence. So not only the abandonment of those actual afflictive states of mind, but also the potential. So every time we give rise to an afflictive state of mind, it plants a seed in our continuum for it to arise again in the future when it meets the right causes and conditions. So nirvana is not only the abandonment of those afflictive states of mind, but also the seeds of those afflictive states of mind, their potential to arise again in the future. So once we achieve nirvana, then there's no potential to give rise to ignorance or anger, attachment, jealousy, and so forth again in the future. That possibility is completely eliminated. So that's what nirvana is, a cessation that is a complete abandonment of the afflictive obscurations, right? The afflictive obscurations, again, are the delusions or afflictive emotions and their seeds. Again, it is not a place that we can go to. So it's not like we go some other place. If we achieve nirvana, we do so right in this very body, in this very, mind, maybe in this very house or country. So it's a completely a state of mind that we achieve. Yeah, I mean, and as we progress in our kind of spiritual practice, we should not. It's not like we like nirvana is kind of a whole take it or leave it thing. You can't. It's not like you achieve little pieces of nirvana, but you achieve more and more similitudes of what it's like to be. So we should, in our own experience, I mean, that's probably why you signed up for a 2-year course on Buddhism, because you got some good experience, hopefully. So, so in our practice as it develops, we should, we should get some experience. Say if we have real difficulty with anger is a big issue for us. Then as we learn about the antidotes to anger, loving kindness and patience, and understanding how anger works, being able to recognize it when it arises, being able to practice patience instead of getting upset about different things. Then as we learn about the antidotes to anger and apply them, we should experience within months or even days some kind of change in the way we experience anger. There should be some reduction in the intensity of our anger when it arises, some reduction in the frequency with which we get angry, a reduction in the amount of time it lasts when we do get angry. So we should see some kind of relief in the mind, right? And that's kind of a taste of what the nirvana to come will be like. People always have the question, well, what do you do when you're free from samsara? Then what do you do? You just kind of be bored and I don't know, a waiting room for enlightenment somewhere or something. But it's not like that. It's like you still experience, I mean, you still go to the grocery store and have meals and hang out with friends, but in your mind, there's no afflictive emotions. There's just kind of equanimity, peace, and joy. I think a lot of joy goes along with it. But then if you add to that, then the altruistic aspiration to use your life to benefit others, then it brings so much more richness and flavor to, um, yeah, the experience of being free from afflictive emotions. Yeah, I haven't achieved nirvana, so I'm just speaking about what my idea of it is, just to make sure I'm not giving a wrong impression. But in our own experience, we should kind of shape an idea of what it might be like. Okay, nirvana is a cessation, that is a complete abandonment of the afflictive obscurations. Again, it is not a place we go to. It is a state that one can attain primarily through transforming one's mind. And then types of nirvana. So just briefly, so there's nirvana with remainder, nirvana without remainder, and non-abiding nirvana. Actually, there's others, but I won't go into much. But I mean, one I did want to mention though is just the natural nirvana. There's a term. Natural nirvana is actually emptiness. It's the it's the fundamental nature of all phenomena, that they're empty of inherent existence. That's called yeah, Ranjingi Nyande. Yeah, naturally abiding nirvana, you could say. So in a way, I mean, it's kind of helpful to think about that, just because in a way it's like that all phenomena that exist, whether it's you as a person, another person, whether it's I don't know, a physical object, a table, a chair, anything we see, smell, taste, touch, any mental experience we have, anything that happens, anything that exists whatsoever. In short, their ultimate nature of phenomena is to be empty of inherent existence. And that nature is pure in different ways, but in one sense, that if we realize that nature, that realization, it leads to infinite happiness and well-being, and undermines all suffering. So in a way, anything that exists, it has its pure nature is called nirvana. So it's a naturally abiding nirvana. Anyway, something just to note. But the main kinds of nirvana we talk about are, when this freedom from suffering that we can achieve. So nirvana with remainder just means, like, in this body that we have now, that's been produced, it's been produced by karma and afflictive emotions, thrown into this life. So within this body, if we achieve nirvana in this life, and we still have this body that was produced by contaminated karma, then we have a remainder of suffering. It's like we have a remainder of a bit of samsara. It's not samsara anymore because it's not under the control. So in this life, if we were to achieve nirvana, then our body and mind are no longer under the control of afflictive emotions and karma. And yet this body that was already produced by past karma, it's already been produced, it will continue to experience sickness, aging, and eventually death. So it's kind of a remainder of a bit of samsara. So therefore, we would be a person who has nirvana with remainder. Then as soon as we die, right? Actually, you don't call it death. You enter into parinirvana. Then we would have nirvana without remainder. So because death is our stream of consciousness, and our continuum as a person would separate from this body. So then we no longer are associated with that remainder of samsara, and we would achieve nirvana without remainder. But then the question becomes, well, then where does our mind go? And if we don't take rebirth, what happens? We'll come back to that. You can think about that in the intervening week. And then there's also called non-abiding nirvana, which is equal to enlightenment, right? So non-abiding nirvana, well, yeah, I mean, by contrast, you could think of abiding nirvana, although that's not really a term that's commonly used. But non-abiding nirvana means basically that, and why is it equal to enlightenment? Because for a Buddha, a person who practiced the Bodhisattva path, and then at the time they achieve enlightenment of a Buddha, they achieve nirvana and enlightenment at the same time. I mean, enlightenment is actually one kind of nirvana. It's non-abiding nirvana. So why is it called non-abiding? Because they don't abide in peace. They don't abide in a state of peace, as opposed to beings who practice the path of hearers or solitary realizers. Meaning beings, there's some kind of practitioners who they practice the Buddhist teachings, especially the 3 higher trainings, for the goal of, remember, beings of the middle scope. Their intention is to just be free from samsara for themselves alone. They don't have this altruistic intention to continually work for the welfare of others. Rather, they just want to be free from the suffering of samsara. So that person, they practice this, the path of a hearer or solitary realizer, it's called. So, and then when they eventually abandon the ignorance, which is the root of samsara, from the root, and with all of its seeds, then they achieve nirvana. But then they just abide in a state of peace, right? They abide. It's kind of once they die away from this life, then they're automatically kind of reborn in sort of a heavenly realm, and they just abide in this very, I don't know, lucid, unperturbable state of peace for a long time, for eons. So that's like abiding nirvana. So converse to that is non-abiding nirvana. So what a bodhisattva does when they abandon the roots of samsara, they become free. They abandon the ignorance, which is the root of samsara, and then rather than then when they die away from this life, they make prayers to again show the aspect of taking rebirth in an ordinary form again. So they don't take rebirth through the force of afflictive emotions and karma, but they take rebirth through the force of merit and prayers and prayer. So rather than abiding in a state of peace, then they appear again in the form of humans or animals or other things in order to work for the welfare of sentient beings. So that state of enlightenment whereby one doesn't abide in just a perpetual state of peace, but rather one engages in activity to work for the welfare of others is called non-abiding nirvana. Okay, so that's a bit about nirvana. And then just a bit about renunciation because it's relevant, but I won't say much about it here. So in short, okay, I'll go ahead and read this quotation since I have it here. Liberation means, and well, in short, renunciation is the aspiration to achieve nirvana, right? It's seeing all the faults of samsara and recognizing that it's possible to achieve a state of freedom from that state of nirvana, which is freedom from all the suffering of samsara. It's the wish, the yearning to achieve that, right? So Tsongkhapa says, liberation means freedom from bondage. What binds you to cyclic existence is karma and afflictions or afflictive emotions. Freedom from rebirth impelled by karma and the afflictions is liberation or nirvana. And the desire to obtain that freedom is the mind intent on liberation. So the mind intent on liberation is just is a synonym for renunciation. So the mind intent on liberation or renunciation. Essentially, renunciation is the mind intent on, the mind yearning to, aspiring to achieve nirvana, achieve freedom from the suffering of samsara. And then I'll skip over that. Okay, so then that's all about nirvana. So any questions about nirvana quickly? Then I'm gonna, next is a bit about the Four Noble Truths. Anyway, we'll have more time for questions at the end. So if you think of anything. Yeah, and we do want to meditate a bit. So all right, I'll say a bit about the Four Noble Truths and then see how much time we have. So the Four Noble Truths are the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So those four, I hope you're familiar with a bit already. I think so, but yeah, these are the first, this is the first teaching that the Buddha gave after he achieved full enlightenment under the Bodhi tree and Bodh Gaya. then he looked with his clairvoyance to see who would be suitable, a suitable audience to explain the path of realization that he developed, he actualized. And then he saw that he saw that his previous two teachers would be the best audience, but they'd already passed away at that time. So then he saw that the 5 friends with whom he'd meditated for several years earlier, they would be the best audience, receptacles for this message. And so he went to find them they were meditating outside the city of Varanasi, ancient city of Varanasi, in Sarnath, Deer Park. So he went and he met them, and then the first thing he taught them was the Four Noble Truths. So this teaching of the Four Noble Truths is kind of like an overarching framework for all of the Buddha's teachings that were to follow in the rest of the 45 or so years of his life. So the truth of suffering is essentially about, our current condition is in the nature of suffering, is a dissatisfactory, dukkha. It's in the nature of dissatisfaction, disappointment, and it will, and it perpetuates itself. And then how are we in this condition in the first place, and how does this condition perpetuate itself is described in the cause of suffering. The state of suffering that we're in, it doesn't come out from nowhere, just chaotically. It's not created by someone intentionally. It arises from appropriate causes and conditions that are suitable to produce it. So then there's a description of, what are the causes that give rise to this state of dissatisfaction and kind of perpetual, problematic experience that we have. So that's the first two, suffering and the causes of suffering. So the first two truths really describe how we're bound in samsara. So this is the main stuff that's explained in the middle scope in this module. It mostly fits in both of these first two. And then the second two truths, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path, describe how to be free from the first two, right? How to get out of samsara. So the first two describe how we're bound in samsara, and the second two describe how to be free from samsara. So the truth of cessation of suffering is just describing, essentially why it's possible to be free from samsara, why it's possible to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering, and that it is, and kind of how it would be like to bring that to an end. So, Nirvana is part of the truth of cessation. But then there's a question, okay, well, if the cessation of suffering is possible, well, how to actualize that? How to achieve that? What do you have to do? What's the path of practice to achieve that? What's the process you go through to gain that, to gain nirvana? So that's described in the truth of the path. So that's just a brief description of each of those. So then the order in which they're presented, well, there's two orders in which you could present the Four Noble Truths. So there's the order of cause and effect and the order of practice or contemplation, right? So, as far as the order of cause and effect, we'll look at the order here, right? The first two, the truth of the suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering, which one of those two, which one's the cause and which one's the effect? Obviously, the second one is the cause, right? And the truth of suffering is the effect of the truth of the cause of suffering. So in sequence and time, what comes first? The cause or the effect? I almost said the chicken or the egg, but that's exactly what I didn't want to do because that's totally unclear. So in sequence and time, of course, the cause comes first, and then its effect comes later, right? That's why it's an effect. It's a result. So why didn't the Buddha teach? He taught them out of order. In terms of sequence and time, actually, the truth of the cause of suffering comes first. The truth of the suffering only comes later. So why did he teach them out of order and sequentially in time? And then the same with the second, so the last two, the truth of cessation That's an effect, right, of practicing the path. So in sequence and time, that one comes later. And first you have to practice the path, and then by practicing the path, eventually you achieve nirvana, you achieve cessation. So again, they're out of order according to sequence and time. But do note here, there's two sets of cause and effect. Oh, sorry, two sets of cause and effect. Oh, I want to actually. Okay. Anyway, my markup pen I was looking for. See it. Anyway, there's two sets of cause and effect. This is the truth of suffering, and the truth of the cause of suffering are the cause and effect that produces samsara. And then the last two is a set of cause and effect of how we're free from samsara, or how we achieve nirvana, right? So this is like, the first is like the contaminated cause and effect, and the second are like the purified or the purifying cause and effect. There's two sets now. So, but the way they're taught is in the order of practice. How do we experience them? How do we realize them? How should we contemplate on them? So how should we practice? So the idea is that basically, before we look to see what the cause of a problem is, first we have to identify that we have a problem. Right? So, or if you use a medical analogy, first, before we look to see what's the cause of a sickness, we have to recognize we have that sickness, right? So first we recognize that we have a problem, we have a sickness, the truth of suffering, that we have suffering in our lives. So first is just a vivid recognition of that suffering exists, it's something I experience. And then we naturally want to be free from it, and then look to see, well, is it possible to be free from it? To check that, we have to see, well, what are its causes? Why is it produced? Why is it arising? So then we look to see, what's the cause of suffering? And then, well, again, the question comes, well, is it really possible to be free from that cause? What's the nature of that cause? Is it possible to eliminate it, or is it something that's inevitable and will always, it's just naturally part of what I am as a person? It'll always be there. So then we investigating that, see that it's possible to eliminate, because as I was saying before, the fundamental basis of samsara is unstable, because it's a kind of misunderstanding, it's an ignorance, a way of misunderstanding things, which we'll talk more about later. But thereby, because it's a kind of misunderstanding, then with wisdom, a correct understanding, it's possible to eliminate that. So therefore, it's possible to achieve cessation of suffering. But then the question comes, well, how do I actually do that? How to do that? How to achieve that? And then explanation of the path, right? So most of the meditations and practices in Buddhism belong to the path, all different kinds of practices, right, to achieve liberation from samsara and achieve full enlightenment. So the order the Four Noble Truths are presented in is the order of practice and contemplation. And this is described by Maitreya Buddha in the Uttara Tantra, the Sublime Continuum, this verse where he says, recognize that you are ill, eliminate the cause of illness, attain health, rely on a remedy. Likewise, you should recognize, eliminate, attain, and rely upon suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path. So just to fill out the medical analogy. So the truth of suffering is like recognizing we have an illness. The truth of the cause of suffering is identifying the cause of that illness. Then the truth of cessation is recognize if we have an illness and we see there's causes of it, then the next thing is check, well, is it possible to recover from this illness or not? Is it terminal, or is it possible to recover from it? Then if we see it's possible to recover, it's possible to bring an end, to bring a cessation to that illness and the symptoms that go along with it. Then the question is, well, what's the remedy? What's the treatment, the medicine or treatment regimen we need to engage in to bring about that cessation? Right? So that's the analogy Maitreya is using there. Great. And then the last slide. So the relation of the four, and we're almost out of time. So the relation of the Four Noble Truths to the Two Truths. The Two Truths is, you probably haven't heard much about yet. And I won't explain much, but I just want to mention. So essentially it's ultimate truth and conventional truth. The main one is ultimate truth is the emptiness, selflessness, the fundamental nature of all phenomena. So it's, how are they related? And then conventional truth is the way ordinary things ordinarily appear to us. So the way I just wanted to point out, because His Holiness makes this point again and again, His Holiness Dalai Lama, that the two truths are related to the four truths because it's by not understanding the two truths, by not understanding, ultimate truth and conventional truth, especially the ultimate nature of all phenomena, due to not understanding the two truths, that we're bound in samsara, that we experience suffering and the causes, and we create causes of suffering. Where it's by correctly understanding the true truths that we're freed from samsara. So by correctly understanding the true truths, generating the wisdom, understanding selflessness or emptiness, the wisdom, understanding ultimate truth, that we can achieve the cessation, and by practicing the path. So we can achieve the truth of cessation by practicing the path, by correctly understanding the true truth. So essentially the truth of the path is a path of generating a better understanding of the two truths. And then, okay, then the Four Noble Truths as a structure for the middle scope. So I was saying earlier, basically everything we're going to look at in this module, which belongs to the middle scope of the Lamrim, it is included in the four truths. So first we'll look at all the suffering of samsara, which is part of the truth of suffering. Then we'll look for all the causes of the suffering, all the afflictive emotions, which is part of the second noble truth, the truth of cause. And then, we'll look at a bit of nirvana, which we just looked at, which is part of the third, the truth of cessation. And then finally, we'll look at the practice of the three higher trainings, which belongs to the truth of the path. So the Four Noble Truths are important as an overarching structure for all the material of the middle scope, but more importantly, as because all of the Buddha's teachings are included in the Four Noble Truths. So maybe we can mention that, but we can talk more about later. But in short, when anytime you study, especially henceforth, anything in like discovering Buddhism or any Buddhist course you're taking, always think about how is this related to the Four Noble Truths. This topic I'm studying, meditating on, practicing, how is it related to the Four Noble Truths? All of the Buddhist teachings fit in the Four Noble Truths. That's why the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths first. It's an overarching structure for everything he will teach later. And then finally, it's because the Buddha unmistakably taught the Four Noble Truths that he's a valid teacher. So this comes from the second chapter of the Pramanavartika by Dharmakirti, where he sets out to establish that the Buddha, the Buddha is a valid teacher, and thereby his teachings are valid teachings. His main reasoning is because to be a valid teacher, one has to unmistakably teach the Four Noble Truths. It's just like to be a valid doctor, right? You have to unmistakably be able to identify sickness, identify the causes of the sickness, correctly identify, whether it's possible to recover or not, and then accurately prescribe, a regimen to treat the sickness. So similarly, to be a valid spiritual teacher, you have to correctly identify the suffering nature of samsara, correctly identify what are the causes of samsara, whether it's possible to be free from that or not, and then especially explain clearly a path which actually leads to freedom from samsara, rather than just perpetuate suffering. So it's because the Buddha taught unmistakably the Four Noble Truths from within his own experience that he's a valid teacher. And thereby more cryptic aspects of Buddha's teachings, which are difficult to prove with logic, we can have confidence in because they're taught by a valid being. So that's how the Four Noble Truths are also important in that way. Okay, so that's all I wanted to present this module. It's probably a little too much. I hope not. But if you have any questions, I can try to clarify. Unfortunately, we won't have time for meditation this time. Okay, any comments or questions? We just have a few minutes left. Just to recap, maybe, to help you just condense in mind what we've talked about. So first, essentially, we just talked about, well, where this module fits in the Lamrim, in the middle scope. In the middle scope, the main topics are the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent arising of the wheel of life, and then the 3 higher trainings. Anyway, we'll come to all that later. But essentially what we discussed was, what is samsara? That samsara is essentially that which arises, is our experience as a person that is perpetuated and
Good
produced
evening,
by
everyone.
our being under the control
Oh,
of.
you've been here with us before?
What?
It's the first time.
Was there a comment or question? I didn't hear. Okay, I'm just recapping. So we discussed what is samsara, what is nirvana, and the Four Noble Truths. Yeah. So I'll test you next week. See, not like a hard test, but try to see what you remember. You should at least try to between now and next week, try to make sure you have, someone were to ask you what is samsara, you be able to give some coherent answer. And same with what is nirvana, what are the Four Noble Truths. If you can remember that, it's good enough. Okay, Kathleen, did you have a question? Okay. Okay. No, Kathleen, are you raising your hand again? I keep seeing you put your hand up. I thought you were like raising. No. Okay. Okay, then let's dedicate briefly. So, Michael, can you share that swift return prayer by His Holiness? So, yeah, rejoice, basically. First of all, rejoice in whatever merit we've created during this 2-hour session from the outset with our positive motivation. And then I think, but by the force of this positive energy or merit we've created, may all sentient beings who are just like us and wishing to have happiness and be free from suffering, may they be free from every form of suffering, especially hunger, thirst, violence, personal, domestic violence, or also in wars like in Sudan, the war there quickly come to an end. Also, of course, Ukraine and other places in the world where there's war, and others who suffer from oppression, violence, abuse. May they be free from all of that. Those who suffer from hunger, thirst, confusion, loneliness, depression, may they all be free. So in short, every sentient being in whatever state of suffering they existed, may they be free from that. And may every sentient being, ourselves and others, have every form of well-being and happiness up to full enlightenment. And then for this purpose, may the Buddha's teachings flourish. May all of our teachers have long and stable lives, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And may this center, Noble Link Center in Santa Fe, continue to flourish and be able to offer programs to countless beings. And then this prayer for the quick return of Kyabja Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Yeah, so may Lama Zopa Rinpoche quickly show the aspect of taking rebirth and correctly training in the path and guiding students again in the future. So we can read together. Peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious ones, teachings and the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge from other living beings, you suddenly departed for peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones. May the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for the fortunate disciples. And then bring to mind any personal prayers you'd like to make. So may all those your personal virtuous aspirations also be fulfilled in accordance with your wishes. Okay, so there we stop. Thank you and see you all next week.
Started.
Thank you.